Okay, hello and welcome to Advances in Emergent Needs in Paleo-Geoscience Cyber Infrastructure, a webinar series organized by C4P. C4P, Collaboration in Cyber Infrastructure for Paleo-Geosciences, is an EarthCube research coordination network supported by the National Science Foundation. I'm Leslie Shee and I'll be the moderator today. In today's talk, we'll have two presentations, each 20 minutes with roughly 10 minutes per question. We'll want to keep this to an hour, so I'll be fairly strict about enforcing time limits and we'll give each speaker a 3-minute warning. If you have questions, please send them through the WebEx chat window to the host and I'll read them aloud after the presentation. You can send in a question at any time. All presentations and follow-up discussion will be publicly archived on the EarthCube website and at the C4P YouTube channel at youtube.com/Cyber4Paleo. Our first speaker today is Chris Norris from Yale University, who will be speaking about the PaleoPortal, and our second speaker is Noren of University of Minnesota, speaking on scientific drilling cyber infrastructure. We'll begin with Chris. Welcome, and you may begin when ready.
Thank you, Leslie. This is, it's notionally a presentation about the Paleontology Portal, although it's probably more of a presentation about the Paleontology Portal and the future of the Paleontology Portal, and particularly iDigPaleo, which might have the potential in the future to be child of the Paleontology Portal. So it's kind of not so much Paleontology Portal, a little more Paleontology Portal future. So I don't know how many of you have seen the Paleontology Portal before, but I'm going to I'll just run through briefly what it is. You can find it at www.PaleoPortal.org. It was first funded by NSF in 2003. Funding was renewed in 2006, and that grant was basically a collaboration between UCMP at Berkeley, the PRI in Ithaca, the American Museum of Natural History, my home institution, the Yale Peabody Museum, and Bloomsburg University. And its mission, briefly summarized, was to facilitate the sharing of paleontological research and resources and to provide exposure to the geosciences in a format that would integrate both biotic and abiotic components of the Earth's history. PaleoPortal supports a very broad community of people, basically pretty much anybody you could imagine that might have an interest in paleontology. And it has a ridiculous number of resources available through its site. You can see by the length of that list there. You can go through state by state or time period by time period looking at paleontology across North America. You can get specific information on famous fossil localities or assemblages. There's a collection of fossil images. You can find out about what a career in paleontology is like by reading interviews with paleontologists. My little subpart of the project that I did is you can find there's a couple of modules if you look after collections or if you're interested in what fossil preparators do that tell you about best practices. There's an interactive map. There are resources for students, resources for teachers. You can actually generate your own downloadable version of the PaleoPortal site and run it in a classroom or on a museum kiosk. And there are copious links to resources on other sites. So it's a huge, huge resource for potentially a very, very broad group of people. But the bit that I particularly want to talk about is the Collection Search Portal. So the Collection Search Portal was a sort of second generation paleontology portal add-on. It wasn't in the original Tapestry of Time site. It came along later on. I'm going to assume that most of you have some familiarity with things like Digger. Basically, it was a Digger-based search portal in that what happens is you run a query. It goes out to the participating institutions. It queries it queries their collections according to the query that you put in, pulls the data back, and assembles the results of that query as if they had come from a single database, which they haven't. They've come from multiple databases. In the case of the PaleoPortal search interface, that's about 12, I call them institutions at the moment, but one of them is Morphobank, which is a data store rather than a museum. The schema for the search portal was Darwin Core 2 version 1.2, an extended version of that. And the search portal at the moment gives you access to a little under 1.5 million records. At the time when this thing was created in the middle part of the last decade, institutions were extremely concerned that they get to retain control over their data, which they do, and this the data resides on their servers in their databases and simply gets pulled out in response to the queries. And it doesn't replace institutional search portals. So this was never intended to make it so that you wouldn't go to AM&H if you wanted to search AM&H's collections online. You wouldn't not go to UCMP if you wanted to search their collections online. The whole purpose of the PaleoPortal collection search was that it would give you an alternate route to resource discovery, not a replacement of the existing routes. So at the time when this thing was created, it was quite groundbreaking and quite exciting. There were not a huge number of data search portals around, but there were and are limitations to doing things the way that PaleoPortal did them. It's a one-way process. You can only serve data to people, and once it comes in, it's static. You can't modify it, you can't enhance it, you can't share it with other people. There's no feedback to the provider. So in other words, really the only benefit that you get in participating in PaleoPortal is that you get exposure through the site to people that are using PaleoPortal, and you get an alternate route for resource discovery for your collections. You can't, for example, quantify how those resources are being used. So if you want to try and figure out which part of your collections are most heavily used, most heavily searched, where you should be putting efforts in to upgrade the quality of your data, you can't do that from PaleoPortal. It doesn't support any sort of metrics. And Digger, while a very useful mechanism for doing this sort of multi-institutional query, does present resource and tech support challenges for installation and maintenance. And that's a problem for smaller institutions that may not necessarily have in-house tech support. So PaleoPortal itself, through its developers Whirligig, spent an awful lot of time going around and fixing people's Digger providers, because the problem was that if a Digger provider of an institution fails, you can no longer query that institution's collections. They just don't appear in the search. Another problem with the PaleoPortal data access portal is that it doesn't let you access collections that are not already online, which sounds like a dumb thing to say, but as we look at digitizing natural history collections, there are a large number of institutions where actually getting a database online is a significant challenge. They would like to share their data, but they don't have a method of doing so. And there was no way that PaleoPortal could actually host data. All it can do is access data that's already available through other routes. So funding for PaleoPortal ended in 2010. And those of us that were working with PaleoPortal realized that this was going to happen. And so starting in 2009, a small group of us began informal discussions, which eventually became formal discussions, about a possible successor to or child of PaleoPortal. This was a smaller group than the total number of people that participate in PaleoPortal, but it was basically UCMP, who were the lead institution on the original PaleoPortal, us here at Yale, PRI, Colorado, and the Florida Museum of Natural History. And as a result of those discussions, we thought that in future we would go for a different approach. The original PaleoPortal assembled educational resources, and then it basically added a collections portal later on. For the new version of the PaleoPortal, or whatever you call it, we would build the new site around the collections portal. The portal would be based around an aggregated database that we would hold. It would harvest data from institutions, but it could also host data as well. And it would provide interactive access to specimen records. It would let users tag records to increase their discoverability, group them together into collections, annotate them, share them with each other, and also feedback data to providers, not only on who was using the collection and what they were using, but also on the annotations, tags, and other things that they were adding to the records, which they could, if they chose, then incorporate into their own collections databases. It was obvious from the start that we would need to have a lot of engagement with the users, so we decided that we would build this new site in consultation with user groups like researchers, amateur, or depending on what you prefer to call them, avocational paleontologists, K through 12 teachers and students. The problem was, of course, that we needed to get it funded, and we had various attempts at finding routes to funding over the course of sort of 2 or 3 years, and became rather frustrated with things until the whole process was given new emphasis by the drive to digitize the nation's bio collections. We had a couple of documents published, one a strategic plan on the left, and then on the right you see the implementation plan for putting that strategic plan into practice. And that community-wide impetus towards digitizing bio collections basically led to a new NSF program called Advancing Digitization of Biodiversity Collections. It's around 10 years of funding. It supports a national digitization hub, which is a collaboration between Florida State University and the University of Florida. It supports things called thematic collections networks, or TCNs. These are groups of people who get together to digitize specimens in order to get data that are needed to solve particular problems. 2 of those TCNs relate to paleontology. One is a biogeography or a paleobiogeography effort called Paleo Niches, run out of the University of Kansas. And the other is the Fossil Insect Collaborative. It's a fossil insect digitization project, which is centered on the University of Colorado. The PI is Dina Smith, and it just so happened that Dina was one of the people that was working with us on the future of PaleoPortal. And so we were able to argue to develop a database for the fossil insect TCN that would also be a pilot version of the same things we had been talking about in terms of a new web portal for PaleoPortal. And we called that resource iDigPaleo. So iDigPaleo basically lets, or will let when it's built, it will let users search the aggregated database, the aggregated data set generated by the fossil insect TCN, and share, tag, and amend records from it. It will provide a tool set for classroom and other learning activities that will be based around real-time access to collections data. In other words, we will be able to teach people through the classroom how to use collections data in the same way that we use collections data for research. Data will be fed out from iDigPaleo to a number of outlets, including a dedicated site for the fossil insect website, but also PaleoPortal, and iDigBio, which is the national hub for digitized biocollections. It also has the capability to ingest data from other TCNs, like the Paleo Niche TCN that I mentioned, future TCNs that we don't know about yet, and other institutions, and potentially feedback, comments, annotations, and metrics if they want them. And critically, it can also host data sets for collections that otherwise can't be made available online, which is something we've rapidly become aware during the national biocollections digitization is a big issue, particularly for smaller institutions. This diagram gives you a very rough sense of how iDigPaleo works. Up at the top here, you've got the collections that are collaborating in the Fossil Insect Project. They're feeding data and images down into iDigPaleo. Here is a loop that's associated with our project whereby we work with a teacher. We have a workshop that will involve K through 16 teachers that looks at how collections data might be used as the basis of classroom activities. And we also have student interns who will test that and feed back to us. So that's a whole feedback and development process to do with producing those classroom tools. And then at the end, data streams out to the Fossil Insect Project portal, to PaleoPortal, and to iDigBio. And we also have the potential to expand it, and that's the red things that you can see here. The red lines are things that NSF did not pay for in this grant, put it that way, but things that we believe are important expansions of iDigPaleo. So as I said, the tool set for classroom usage is going to be developed and refined through collaboration with K-16 educators and high school interns. That's something that we're doing here at Yale. The Fossil Insect website, the one for the project, is going to show everything. It's going to show tagged and amended data that was generated during the outreach and proofing activities of the project. The stuff that goes to the PaleoPortal and to iDigBio is initially going to be the clean version. It's not going to have any user taggers or anything else associated with it. They will have the option to take the tag data in the future if it proves useful. To give you some sense of the timeline with this, we're currently working with our developer, WhirlyDig, to finalize the data schema. Alpha version should be out later this year. We'll then do in-house testing. In the summer of next year will be the K through 12 teacher workshop. and then that will lead on into testing and refinement of the tool set, working with our student interns from 2015 through 2017, hoping to get a data version out for people to look at on the web in the fall of 2016, full system release in the fall of 2017. Our long-term goal is to scale up this pilot version to form the core of a reconstituted PaleoPortal that will give people interactive access to collections data, and that will incorporate those data into the educational and research tools that are already part of PaleoPortal. I was specifically asked, in the context of this talk, to talk about what our challenges are. There are many, but I'll give you some of the ones that I foresee here as being particularly problematic. One is we're going to go out and harvest data from people's collections in order to build this aggregated database that forms iDigPaleo. We have to standardize protocols that will allow us to do that automatically across multiple providers. Now, at the moment, we know that we have to host information from the project participants in the fossil insect digitization project, and that means we can sit down, or our developer can sit down with them and figure out the protocols for export in advance. As we grow this thing, that becomes more problematic, and we're beginning to have to get more and more into educating people more widely about the importance of adhering to standards like Darwin Core in the structuring of their data. Another issue is that this is collections data. There's an awful lot of data out there in other databases, in other community resources that could enrich those collections data, and where we feel our collections data could potentially benefit them. Those are things like PBDB, Neotoma, FaunMap, or MyoMap. These are all, to name just a few, these are all things where we have the potential for all sorts of very exciting synergies, but also quite complex ones, perhaps, technically. And so that's something that we're going to have to wrestle with if we need to bring this thing up to the sort of size or extent of the PaleoPortal, current PaleoPortal collection search interface, let alone something that's bigger than that. You've also got to assume or find some way to ensure that regular updates will be available to incorporate emergent technologies. Part of the problem with PaleoPortal is it became dated. The current search interface looked great 10 years ago as an idea when it was being built. It looks somewhat less exciting these days. But really, there was no mechanism built into that process to ensure that as new tools and technologies emerged, and I think they will emerge from the current biocollections digitization efforts, they were incorporated into and updated the portal itself. And then related to that is the big question of long-term sustainability. We invest public money in building these very complex and very exciting sites, phenomenal aggregations of resources in some cases, in the case of PaleoPortal, but we're not always so good at figuring out how they will be sustainable. There was some feeling with PaleoPortal that it would be picked up by discipline-related societies in paleontology who would then subsequently handle the future sustainability and development of the site, and that didn't really materialize, I think, in the way that the original project team were hoping. So, if we build this thing, how will we keep it running and current and modern in the longer term? The biggest challenge, I think, and this was certainly a challenge that came up every time we put this thing out for peer review, was if we build it, will anyone actually use it? This is a challenge that's shared, I think, with the wider biocollections digitization effort in seeking to get more extensive public funding for digitizing collections. A number of people have argued that digitized collections data is going to yield significantly transformative effects in research and education, that somehow we will do remarkable things with collections data in the way that people do remarkable things with, say, airline flight data or sales data or HMO data. If we're going to do that, we actually have to get people who are not currently users, not currently familiar with collections, to actually use them. I think we may not simply be able to stick something exciting out there, stick our data out there and expect people to participate. I think we may actually have to actively go out and build new user communities around collections data. That's something that we were going to do in some of the versions of the iDigPaleo project, some of the earlier versions that were applying for more funding. In the pilot version, we don't really have funds to do that, but I suspect that as we seek to expand it, this is going to be very important. It's not enough simply to build an exciting website. You actually have to convince people to use it, and not just convince people to use it, actually support the development of communities that will build it. And that, I think, is me done. It was a very quick presentation. Hopefully, I'm sure people will have questions. If you are interested, there are a bunch of links here that will take you to some of the resources or some of the sites that I've talked about and projects that I've talked about briefly during this presentation. And I think this presentation is then available, is archived, right, Leslie, so that people can access it? Are you there, Leslie?
I am here. Sorry, that is right. It will be archived on YouTube.
Right, okay. So that's it, and I can take questions if people have questions.
Thanks a lot, Chris. We'll wait a couple moments for the questions to come in. Just type them into the chat. So the first question is, can you describe your plan for the user consultation process for feedback?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the initial focus of this pilot version is on the classroom usage of collections data. So what we're basically doing through the pilot project is we are hosting a workshop here at the Peabody for people who are science educators. And they're not science educators that are completely unaware of natural history collections. I mean, in a sense, we're preaching somewhat to converts because they're people that are already associated with Peabody education programs. Part of that workshop is looking at collections data, looking at what we as science professionals do with collections data and saying, okay, how could we adapt these to develop a number of fairly simple, straightforward classroom activities that feed into the core curricula for, certainly locally, for Connecticut, because that's the audience that we primarily deal with. From that, we then basically work up those activities dealing with kids in our after schools program here at the Peabody. Again, they're not necessarily completely unaware of the value of collections. After school kids work regularly as interns in the collections. They develop exhibits associated with our collections. So they are to some extent familiar, and we do that as a sort of feedback mechanism. We sit down with them, we go through these activities, we say, how does this engage with you? What do you think is interesting in this? How would this grab your attention? And basically from that kind of feedback to develop at least a small package of classroom activities that will use the collections data. The public engagement beyond that, beyond the development of the pilot project, is a little more complex. In the original grant proposal that we wrote, we were going to create user groups of different sectors of people with interest in paleontology. So we had a group that was dealing with researchers, we had a group that was dealing with amateur stroke educational collectors, we had a student group, we had a teacher group. And each institution that was collaborating was going to take responsibility for one of those groups based on the people that they normally work with. And again, sit down, have an actual sort of workshop meeting going through the value of collections data, and then begin to work with them both directly and online on the collections interfaces that we were developing as part of the project. That we haven't got funded. That's probably the direction we would go. But since we started doing this, there are a number of interesting outreach and crowdsourcing opportunities that are taking place through iDigPaleo in conjunction with their digitization efforts. So I think what we would probably do in terms of user consultation was begin to partner more closely with iDigPaleo in the future. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And that's actually a great lead into the next question, which is, are you planning to have the same data structure as iDigPaleo?
Yeah, it does. Essentially, what we're doing at this point is our developer is dealing directly with iDigPaleo. so that our data structure syncs pretty much exactly with theirs, so that we have a very, very easy flow of information from our database to theirs. From their point of view, as they ingest paleontological data in the future, it's kind of nice for them if it comes through one pipeline. So one of the discussions we've been having with them, and we'll continue to have over the next few months, is the extent to which they would like us to act as a pipeline down which digitized paleo data comes to them. Obviously, we can't really do that at the moment because the system isn't built and it's primarily aimed at the fossil insect collection. In the future, it might actually provide a more sort of consolidated pipeline for the flow of paleo data into iDigBio.
Okay, thanks. Next is, would you like to make any comments on issues of databasing geological age information with iDigBio or iDigPaleo?
No. Well, I'm not going to do that because it's not something that I've particularly been working with. What I would say is that within iDigBio, there is a very active paleo group. So one of the things that iDigBio has been very, very good at doing is setting up user groups that are sort of webinar-based. We have regular webinars. I did one on data redaction a few weeks ago. And one of the issues that's been highlighted at a very early stage is the issue of geological data. It's already an issue for us because, you know, there are problems in the feed out data. GBIF, for example, they don't tend to be able to handle geological data very well. And so that was recognized at an early stage as somewhere where iDigBio needed to work with the paleo community. So the simple answer is no, I can't really comment on it except to say that it is a recognized problem, that there is a sort of paleo outreach group within iDigBio. And if you are interested in finding more about that, the person to talk to is Gil Nelson, who's at Florida State University, and he has been doing a phenomenal job of outreach to different sectors of the collections community, including the paleo community, and this is very definitely in his sort of purview to look at that problem.
Okay, great, thanks. We have a comment here from Kirsten Leonard. There's been an initiative in the geoscience collections community to provide a similar infrastructure for management and access of rock, core, and mineral collections. Digital environment for sample collection. Is the iDigPaleo infrastructure scalable to serve broader ranges of samples and collections?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I know that Dina, who's our PI on fossil insect TCN, has been talking about that issue with them, or certainly talking about the project. I'm aware of the project. We had not thought about that initially because of the rather sort of, you know, it's the odd thing about paleo collections. You can look at them as earth science stroke geological collections, or you can look at them as biological collections. The initiative to digitize paleo collections has kind of come from the biological side, and so there probably hasn't been as much awareness of the potential to deal with, you know, abiotic physical geology type collections as there might have been. The simple answer is I don't know, but we are open to collaborating with anyone. And at this stage in the project, it would be good to talk about that because we haven't built it yet. We are still figuring out the schema. If we need to build in the capability to scale that schema somewhat, then now is the time to have those discussions. So yeah, we're certainly open to that.
Chris, thanks so much for your talk. There are a couple other questions we weren't able to get to because of time, but I will email those to you right after this webinar, and we'll post the answers up on the C4P webpage and link them from the archived talk. So thanks again.
Okay, no, you're welcome. Thank you. I need to unshare my desktop. Okay.
Yep, I will move that over to Anders now.
Okay.
And unmute Anders. All right, Anders.
Okay, I am Anders Noren. I'm here from the University of Minnesota to talk about some of the cyber infrastructure we use in the continental scientific drilling community. Some of these resources are also used by the ocean drilling community, but the focus of my talk will actually be on the tools used by people doing work on Earth's continents. So make this full screen for everyone. Okay, so I come to this from LACCOR, which is the National Lacustrine Core Facility at the University of Minnesota. For a number of years, we've been working with people in the community to help with things like project development, logistics, contracting, field work of all kinds, laboratory activities, data and sample curation and dissemination, and other things as well. And we recently were awarded the Continental Scientific Drilling Coordination Office cooperative agreement from NSF, which is going to allow us to extend the support we provide to these communities to those people seeking project development and support for major drilling operations. These were activities formerly handled by DOSEC, which a current iteration of still does drilling operations. Our role is a coordinating entity. So we have transitioned away from working in just soft sediment lithologies to lithified and crystalline types of materials as well. Work on in any location on those continents, whether dry land, open water, or ice. And these same roles continue to be applicable. So there are many different components to this, of course. In the field, we will often deploy a field curator or scientist who handles things like data capture in the field, metadata management, drilling management, and optimization, any subsampling that happens in the field, and core management generally. But the bulk of the work that happens in this community happens in a lab. And ours is a central facility where this happens. So there are the typical kinds of data sets that you find with core sample-based research, multi-sensor logs, high-resolution digital images with logic descriptions, subsampling metadata, and so on. Maintaining a repository brings its own set of requirements to the table as well, and distributing samples. And then there's the need also to manage project reports and publications and things like that. So there are many tools that are used in this work, ranging from basic databases, registration entities, visualization tools, archives, and other data management systems downstream. The ones that I'm going to focus on today are highlighted here, and I will say that these are not my products specifically. This is the work primarily of other people, but which we have found to be sufficiently useful to our operations that we not only employ them on a routine basis, but also train our visitors and other people in the community to use. And so just need to give credit to Sean Higgins and Ito, Frank Rack, and Josh Reed, and Amy Mirbo for their work on these tools. So to start at the beginning, Correlator is an application used for stratigraphic correlation of cores from multiple holes. This is a rewrite of the Splicer and Sagan programs, which have been used in the ocean drilling community for some time. It's for where sediment core samples are recovered, and there's an expectation that you would have incomplete recovery during drilling, and it allows you to combine the records from multiple holes into a composite section and use the best material from each hole, and to integrate the data from the cores with the data from the downhole logs. So this is an example of the correlator screen where you have a data set, in this case density of the core, from each of 4 different holes, and the user in this case is comparing the data from one hole to that of another, and aligning the features so that each hole has the features lined up with the previous features from another hole. This is done visually as well as mathematically. You can see the evaluation graph in the upper right-hand corner that helps to guide the process. Once those records are assembled into a splice, which is a synthetic core, if you will, it combines all the best features from various holes. That synthetic record can then be corrected to the true depths encountered in the borehole by means of comparison with the downhole logs. And that's what's going on in this slide. You can see the purple trace of the downhole log being automatically aligned with the green trace of the data derived on the cores. Moving along to Coralizer, this is a visualization platform for high-resolution core images and data sets that derive from cores. It allows visual correlation of core features and core data comparison. I'm going to switch to a brief demonstration of what Coralizer is. This is it. We have a workspace here that is blank at the moment. It has a couple of control panels, and I'm going to open up a session that I had already set up. And I'll just note that although it takes some time to load the images the first time you do this, once they have been loaded and you're simply reloading cached images, you can see that they actually appear on screen quite quickly. And this is the great strength of Coralizer. It is perhaps the best means of getting high-resolution core images in and out of memory quickly so that you can zoom out to see the big picture, the many holes worth of data, into the really fine-scale features. These are the uncompressed images, and so when you zoom in, you can see fine-scale laminations, finer than a millimeter. You can see individual grains of sand, if you like, and so what we find is that there's really no feature that does something similar right now. There are other things you can do, of course, besides look at images. You can also look at the data sets that are derived from those cores, and I've loaded some of those data onto the cores at the top here. You can easily change scales of the data. You can look at how those data correlate to the lithologies that you see, and if you zoom out, it makes it easier to look at where those features, to find features of interest based on the numerical data, and then zoom in to see how those features might express themselves as the lithologies see it. Okay, so that is it for Coralizer. If we go back into our presentation here, move along to SciCat. This is an application for visual core description, where you take an image of the core and you annotate it with notes about pathology, color, texture, structure, and other features of interest. And again, I can pull up SciCat for a brief demonstration of what that looks like. This is SciCat. It has a list of core sections here. It has the workspace over here where you have the core image. You can zoom in and out on that core image. And then you have over to the right a series of columns where you can put data about those cores. So for example, I can set an interval right here. I can call that mudstone, and you can define these vocabularies as you wish ahead of time. I can say if there's going to be a feature here, that's just a little gap, but if we call that gastropod shell, for example, related to this interval, I can put a description in here that says something like brownish gray mudstone, and have that information pop up here. And I can keep building this information as I go. When I call that banded igneous rock, we can call this diatomite, diamictite even, and so on, to make it the SciCat's strength is that it really fits the workflow of describing cores. It allows you to do this very quickly, and then the results that you get when you save this and make your exports are that you can either have PDFs of your core description sheets, They can be done on a core-by-core basis, where all the cores can be run together like this. And I should say that cores can be run together in the program itself as well, if you choose to do it that way. Cycat can also export data in a tabular format so that the data are more easily read by a database or some other tool that you might have that would store depths and descriptive comments and lithologies and features. Okay, so we'll move along to CoreRef. This is a web application for core data visualization and reference. It allows you to quickly access the fundamental core data sets for a given project. I will bring up the CoreRef website here, coreref.org. We can look in programs, we'll go to the iCDP program. At the moment, there is only one expedition loaded into CoreRef from iCDP. That's 5011, which is the Lake Elgin drilling project. I can click on the whole, and there's the overview of the cores. It shows all the thumbnail of each of the core images, and I can click on one of those images, and it will bring up the available data sets at that location. So, for example, here we have magnetic susceptibility, and that's done at in high res in this case. We have the core lithologies, which if you mouse over, it will show you the information that's available. It's created in the core description. And then your core image and the X-radiograph. You can load other kinds of images here as well, and it's very easy to either scroll to the side this way, or just grab the image and move it up or down. Yep, there it goes. I'm able to do that here. So what this allows you to do, without getting too involved in the in loading information, it allows you to quickly look at the core information, so that samples that are yielding data downstream can be set in their lithologic context very easily. You can't, for example, slide cores left-right or compare cores across multiple holes very easily as you can do in Corelizer, but CoreRef fills a very important role in just being able to provide that information quickly to anyone who needs it. And this is login-based control, even though it's sort of on the web. Okay, back to the presentation again. The last tool I'll speak about is TMI, which is the tool for microscopic identification. This is an online reference that serves people working on petrographic smear slides and other doing other kinds of microscopic analyses. It allows you to look to very easily identify the components of smear slides, whether they're minerals or biological or other kinds of features, contaminants, and so on. There are tutorials available online that show you how to make smear slides. They show you, can get you thinking about sedimentary environments based on the kinds of components that you can see, and they can help with other kinds of work that you might have as well. You can get into the images stored and the data stored in TMI through multiple means. One is by showing you all of the information, as you can see on screen here. You can then quickly, through choosing different kinds of features, you can read this down into the kind of information that you seek. You can specify if it's a plant, you can specify it's a mineral, you can say whether it has high relief or low relief, and so on, and quickly get to the subset of components that you might be looking at and which have some relevance to interpretation of your samples. And so there are a number of things, a number of targets out there that we have for the future. We are continually working on refining and developing of these tools. We're trying to integrate functionality between tools and eliminate redundancies, establish linkages between tools so that, for example, work done in Correlated can be reflected in the positions of your core images in Coralizer, just as one example. And to have some kind of shared data repository that allows these tools to pull information from that instead of just hosting files locally. Challenges to this, of course, the big one is funding. We find that the turnover of developers, as one person rotates out and there might be a gap until the next person steps in, creates problems in coming up to speed on the knowledge of the code base. And of course, just the ever-present need to keep up with evolving operating systems and other software on which these applications depend, like Java, for example. There's a constant need for development and not always a constant funding supply. And at the bottom there, I have links to these, at least to most of these resources. I will say that any of them can run on either a Mac or PC. Any recent computer will do. The one that I'm working on today, for example, is a 6-year-old MacBook Pro, and that works just fine for everything that I need to do with these tools. So no substantially special hardware required. And with that, I will take questions.
Thanks a lot, Anders. The first question is, how do these tools fit into the Earth Cube initiative? Or put another way, how could C4P help these projects and vice versa?
Well, I think there are a couple of different ways. One is just by increasing visibility of these tools and to maybe make a some kind of statement that these tools are important to this domain. They are relevant, and that they, that the challenges that they face are something they're challenges that have come up repeatedly in EarthCube. What is the sustainability model, right? So figuring out how to address that broadly will certainly help these tools specifically. But also, just I think it's important to keep these kinds of visualization tools in mind when we are thinking about the development of other tools and how these tools might interface together. I think that we as we look toward developing something like DESC, for example, the digital environment for sample curation that Kirsten mentioned earlier in her question, we need to think about how what that tool is going to hold in it, and how to get that information out to these programs, and where there are gaps. For example, still at the moment we have no consistent place where we can put data sets like core images or magnetic susceptibility data. Of course, they can go into a variety of different resources, but it doesn't make it easy for these tools to get those fundamental data sets back out and to visualize them for other people down the line who might want to see what was done or how these samples might fit into their research.
Thanks for that answer. The next question is, can you tell us a bit more about the process for deciding new features and getting feedback from the users?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have, at the LACOR facility, we have something like an average of 400 different unique visitors coming through our facility every year, and all of them work with some subset of these tools. And so the feedback we get from people while they're in our lab working with the tools guides us to a great degree. We also, of course, use these tools ourselves and constantly have to train people. That training has to happen over and over again. And so we ourselves find things that, for relatively low cost can make a big difference in the usability of the tools. We also have online forms at least for Corelizer and Correlator. Those forms are available at corewall.org, where you can submit bug reports or feature requests. And we receive emails when those forms are submitted, and then we talk about those and try to integrate them into our long list of things that we want to do with these tools.
Thanks for that answer. So there's no other questions at this time, but we'll wait a little bit longer.
While we're waiting, I guess one other thing I could say about how to identify features for development. Of course, there are other, the work that we do in the lab is just the start. Of course, conversations that we have with people at conferences and workshops and so on also guides this to a great degree. We find that the one-on-one personal connections are very important for communicating this kind of information, problems that people are having and so on. It's very easy for someone to find a stumbling block and then just say, oh, I'll deal with that later, or I don't have time for this now, and then they don't get back to it. But getting that feedback from people is critical to understanding what is important for focusing our resources.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit more about the image sieve and that technology? How recent is that piece of the software, and how did you decide to design it this way?
Okay, so again, I'll just first emphasize that this is ImageSieve is part of the TMI, the tool for microscopic identification. It's something that Amy Mirbo she's the PI on the geoinformatics grant that has funded the development of this. And so that question is best addressed to Amy, or Amy's best prepared to address that. But what I know is that ImageSieve is basically the term that she came up with to incorporate Microsoft product into TMI. And the Microsoft product, the name eludes me, and probably somebody remembers it, but it's a standard product that allows you to take lots of different images of things and categorize them in different ways and sort them and display them in a really graphically rich environment. It's actually quite cool when you're using it. I did not do a tutorial or a demonstration of that here because it's really processor intensive, and it's best done locally rather than in a circumstance like this. But it's a very effective means for people to look at all of the available information out there and quickly sort and see how the consequences of the sorting and the filtering that they choose update their search results in real time. That's one of the strengths that I like about it, and there may very well be other kinds of general benefits that it provides as well.
Okay, thanks. Next question is, how do you set up the graphical library, the legend of lithological patterns, and implement it with the Corewall program? And are there any libraries of other subjects?
That's a great question. The graphical library, I'm assuming that is the SciCat library, these symbols and such. Most of these symbols were developed for SciCat as part of the Andril program, which was the program that funded its initial development. And I believe that the existing library is directly, well, it is the library that they used. SciCat does come with a scheme editor, it's called, where you can get into not just the symbols, but the definitions of these terms and set exactly what you want them to be. We have not yet done additional work in adding community-specific terms, for example, but this is one of the things that we have in front of us, probably within the next couple of months, to get more lacustrine sediment core specific information into this. And it's relatively easy to use scheme editor. I won't bring it up here, but it's a very simple interface that allows you to develop these as you like. And as far as I know, there are not other libraries or vocabularies that have been developed and that are immediately available. They would need to be developed as users require it.
So why don't we end with this last question? What extra, or are there any extra modules planned for this suite of tools?
At the moment, I don't know that there are modules exactly. There is some talk about taking the descriptive capabilities of SciCat and the annotation capabilities of SciCat and incorporating that into Coralizer, thereby reducing the number of tools that would be required to do this kind of work. There's also talk of increasing the linkages between tools like between Correlator, Stratigraphic Correlation Program, and Coralizer, so that changes made in one can be reflected in the other. But at the moment, there are not, to my knowledge, thoughts about exactly whole new tools that would be developed as part of this suite, but rather just enhanced functionality for each of the existing tools.
Okay, Anders, thank you very much for that informative presentation, and thanks to both of the presenters today. This webinar will be available both at the EarthCube website and the C4P YouTube channel, Cyber4Paleo, soon. For future webinars, please check the C4P webinar schedule at the earthcube.org site. And thank you very much for attending. Hope to see you at a future webinar.